and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, a Catholic expert on China's population control tells us what we should know about a new documentary exploring the history of China's one-child policy. An abortionist says he has no problem with killing babies. In a recent TV interview, we speak out. And this.
I want to sanctify my ordinary words and deeds and fill my days with as much love as I can to just show how grateful I am.
Her unborn baby's miraculous healing paved the way for Cardinal John Henry Newman's canonization. We hear firsthand about this pro-life miracle. But first, our top story, we have a one-on-one interview with a pro-life governor. Kristi Noem took office as South Dakota's governor this year, becoming the state's first female governor. She previously served as a U.S. representative for 8 years, where she had a 100% pro-life voting record. In her short time as governor, Noem has already signed 5 pro-life bills into law, including one giving women the chance to view a sonogram and hear their unborn child's heartbeat before getting an abortion, and a law criminalizing forced abortions. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem joins us now from her state's capital in Pierre, South Dakota. Governor Noem, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you.
Absolutely. You have been governor 8 months now, and you've already signed a far-ranging package of 5 pro-life bills into law. Was there one specific pro-life law in that package you believe was most important?
You know, I don't know. Any bill that we could pass that would protect a life is incredibly important. So we have some disclosure legislation that passed that gives mothers more information before they go in to get an abortion or when they're in the process of doing that. There's another one that dealt with coercion. So many times women are feeling pressured to have an abortion. And so we wanted to make sure that coercion couldn't be utilized to end a baby's life. And putting those protections in statute was incredibly important to the people of South Dakota.
What's your next pro-life priority? What's on your radar?
Well, you know, I've committed to being the most pro-life governor in the nation. I think someone needs to lead by example. I'm actually the first governor that would put an unborn person advocate on my staff that actively looks every day for ways to protect life. And to provide that kind of leadership is incredibly important. So my team is going through that process right now of identifying different pieces of legislation that can be utilized to do so. And so we often talk about ending abortion. And actually in the last decade, we've seen our abortions cut in half in South Dakota, go down over 55%. Last year we had the biggest decrease ever in the last decade as well.
Your state, South Dakota, has 1 remaining abortion facility. What does this reveal about the pro-life movement in South Dakota, in your opinion?
Well, I think in South Dakota, we've had rigorous debate over the years, and the fact that we have 1 provider still in the state that often has to fly in doctors from out of state to perform those abortions is progress. That means that we're educating people about the value of life and the science behind that life, and that more and more people are understanding that this is something that we should continue to defend. So, you know, I think that in my perfect world, South Dakota would no longer have any abortions, that we would be there for every young woman who finds themselves in a situation where they're making decisions, and that we could come alongside them and support them. I also talk every day about foster care and about adoption. I think it's incredibly important that we have leaders that focus on coming alongside families and building strong families. When we can raise children in an environment where they're loved, they'll be much more successful.
You are South Dakota's first female governor, yet abortion advocates would like to have people think to be pro-woman, you have to be pro-abortion. What's your response to that talking point?
Well, I reject it wholeheartedly. You know, as a mom, I certainly understand what it feels like to have a life inside of me, and to understand that it's a creation that was a special gift from God for me and my family. My faith is incredibly important to me, and I talked about that a lot during the campaign and still do every day. So to be the first female governor who can speak from a different perspective on this issue, I think has the potential to be very powerful. It's one thing for someone who's gone through a pregnancy or gone through the decision of becoming a mother, to speak on that than it is someone who hasn't had the chance to experience that. And I just hope that it's heartfelt and that they'll know that our belief and the knowledge and the science and everything that we hold dear can be portrayed as caring for people, that truly at the end of the day, that's what we want to do.
You previously served as a representative in the U.S. House. There are now only about a dozen pro-life women in the House of Representatives, partially because some female lawmakers, such as yourself, have gone on to take higher office. But Governor, how can the pro-life movement better support female candidates running for Congress?
Well, what I've consistently told people is that you need to ask people to serve. So many times, and especially women, if you want pro-life women serving in Congress in leadership roles, many times they just have to be asked. We have a lot of duties on our plate, getting pulled different directions between jobs and careers and families, and so often that if we're going to see a change in some of these leadership positions, we need to be a part of that solution, ask them to do that and support them as they run for office. You know, I was incredibly blessed to be there for 8 years in the House of Representatives and work on pro-life legislation. We did some big things to protect life and protect pain-capable children and pass legislation on the national level. But I also think as governor that I have a different platform I can utilize, that now I'm the CEO of a state. Now I'm one of 50 instead of one of 435, and that voice can be more powerful. So if I can in any way support those leaders that are fighting an uphill battle in Congress, then I will be doing that as well. So most of the time waking up every day and just looking for opportunities to be a part of the solution is the best thing that we can do. We wake up, we turn on the news, and we see opportunities to criticize, and I have to constantly readjust and look for ways that I can support those who really are doing a lot of good work.
Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And joining us in studio for Pro-Life Analysis is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Marjorie, welcome back.
Hello, Catherine. I've missed you.
I know, it's so good to see you as as the summer comes to an end. Speaking of Governor Kristi Noem, you just watched that interview. Your group endorsed Kristi Noem in her campaign to become South Dakota's governor. 8 months into her job, what do you make of her pro-life leadership?
Well, I mean, I love her. I knew her in the House of Representatives. She was a vital part of our team in the House of Representatives. She's just a spectacular person. She's the first female governor in South Dakota. She's an articulate spokeswoman. She is a woman of her people. She's a rancher, for heaven's sakes. I mean, she's just all the good things. She's signed as the governor and then articulated as the governor a package of pro-life bills, and then articulated why it was so important to do this. And it was a beautiful victory. They couldn't have done it without her, and nobody better than she to really carry that in.
Speaking of governors, I know your team was in Kentucky last week to support Governor Matt Bevin and his reelection. Can you speak about the role of governor and the role the governor has in advancing the pro-life movement?
Well, I think it cannot be overestimated the importance of governors right now. They've certainly always been important. They've been important because they're the final say in whether legislation passes or not. They're, they can also veto. Governors are the front line. Susan B. Anthony List, our whole strategy is to elect the president so we have a Supreme Court so that these governors can sign bills that actually mean something, that they go into effect. So it has truly shifted to the state level, and the governors are the executives of those states. They have a legislative function, a executive function, and an advocacy function that cannot be substituted in any other way.
You mentioned Governor Noem is South Dakota's first female governor. What kind of message does that send about our movement that there is this female pro-life governor?
Yeah, well, look at you, look at many friends around you, many pro-life women that we've helped elect, the leaders of the pro-life movement who are women. Why do we do this? Do we think that women are superior to men? No. Do we think that somehow we're inherently better at doing this? No. But what we do, and when we elect women, the effect of it is to say, all you feminists who said that abortion was the great liberator, we know the lie that is. We can speak to what that has done to our sisters historically, the pain, the death to children, the death of the spirit that it's done to women. We're uniquely prepared, uniquely situated to talk about that in ways that complement the ways that our brothers talk about it as well.
You mentioned you knew Governor Noem when she was in the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, there are only about a dozen pro-life women in the House. What can the pro-life movement do to build up the next generation of pro-life female lawmakers?
Well, I'm going to be very frank, very concrete. There are two things. One is, if you're a woman, think about yourself as a candidate and be brutal in thinking about that path, how hard it is, and whether you're able to do it. And then communicate with people like me and you about that. Number two, but probably more urgent at this point, is women that are running, and you can figure that out by looking at our website, women that are running around the country, support them with your prayers, with your feet, and with your money, because they need it, and they don't necessarily have the system sometimes to support them in the way that your typical candidates do. It's really important to find them, support them, and send them messages. I have so many friends that have been that are women members of Congress that appreciate the money. They need the money, but frankly, what has really touched them deeply is the prayers and the sentiments written on pieces of paper, kind of all bundled together and sent to them. And we love to give those messages to them.
That is some really powerful insight. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, thank you for your pro-life leadership.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Catherine. Thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you, Marjorie. The U.S. government recently took a new step to defend life all over the world. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar recently submitted a letter to countries in the United Nations urging them to join the United States and ensuring the best ways to protect the unborn and defend the family. This letter makes the U.S. government's pro-life position clear to the United Nations and foreign governments. As Catholics in the Universal Church, we know it's crucial to stand up for life all over the globe. And that brings us to this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to thank Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Azar for their joint letter urging countries to protect the unborn and defend the family at the UN. When you get to our website, ProLifeWeekly.com, you will be able to fill out your information and deliver this message directly to Secretaries Pompeo and Azar. Their submitted letter is a crucial step toward protecting life all over the world and makes clear where the United States stands on this most important issue. The joint letter states pro-abortion efforts at the UN, quote, undermine our shared commitment to sustainable development and to achieving health for all, leaving no one behind. Let us make sure Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Azar know their pro-life action is supported by the pro-life movement. You can send your thank you message by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, a new documentary sheds light on China's history of population control.
I never thought much about what the policy meant for me or anyone until I learned that I was going to be a mom.
One Child's Nation is a new documentary produced by Amazon Studios, which follows one woman's journey in uncovering the history of China's one-child policy and its impact on generations. China's one-child policy prohibited most couples from having more than one child and was often brutally enforced by the communist government. In 2015, China announced it would relax the policy, permitting most couples to have 2 children. One Child's Nation was recently released in select theaters to a lot of fanfare, even winning the Grand Jury Prize at this year's Sundance Film Festival. Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, is a prominent expert on China's population control and Catholic speaker. He wrote in part this about the film. While nothing in the documentary surprised me, it has apparently stunned many progressives. In fact, to judge from the buzz about the film, many on the left seem to be genuinely astonished by the sheer evil of China's policy and talk about it as if they were becoming aware of it for the first time. And joining us now in studio is Stephen Mosher himself, the president of the Population Research Institute. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
This documentary is creating a lot of buzz about China's one-child policy. You were in China in 1980 when this policy was first implemented. Remind our viewers what it entailed.
What it entailed was arresting women who were, in some cases, 5, 7, 9 months pregnant, telling them their babies were illegal, and then taking them to local clinics where they were given poison shots into the uterus to kill their unborn child. And then, to make matters worse, the women who were 7, 8, 9 months along were given cesarean sections to remove the now dead and dying babies. I was in the operating room when these injections were being given, when the cesarean section abortion was being done. It was a horrifying experience for me, and of course even more drastic and horrifying for the women.
What was your take on this new documentary, One Child's Nation? Did it accurately depict China's one-child policy and the brutality included?
It's a good documentary. People ought to watch it if they want to understand how the one-child policy has affected women and families in China. But from my point of view, it's too little and too late. It's too late because the policy started in 1980. It ended a couple of years ago, but there are still abuses in China. So where were they for the past, 40 years in reporting on this? The left was nowhere.
Yet you've been speaking out boldly about this since 1980, since the start. And since China has relaxed this policy to be the so-called two-child policy. But what do you think are some of the misconceptions now that that's been put into place?
Well, two things, basically. One is that although we now have a two-child policy, it is still illegal for women who are unmarried to get pregnant and have children. So if the state finds out that you're about to be a single mom, they will arrest you still, and they will forcibly abort you, because single mothers are not permitted in China today. That's why there are places in China that house single mothers, that hide them from the authorities. The other misconception is, yeah, it's a two-child policy now. You're free to have 2 children, but not really, because the state is now pressuring people to have a minimum of 2 children. So you can see the trajectory. We've gone from forcing people to stop at 1 child to encouraging them to have 2, and now saying you've got to have 2. Party members have been told they must have 2, they must lead by example. And what we see, I think, coming is forced pregnancy.
That is devastating. And finally, Stephen, can you speak to the ongoing ramifications of the one-child policy? It will affect generations.
Generations will see their family tree with all the branches shorn away, right? The second generation of only children have no cousins, no aunts, no uncles. The typical family in China now has 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child. And it's a misguided policy that was put in place by Communist Party officials who had no idea what they were doing culturally, socially, or economically. They've killed off 400 million babies in China. That's 400 million of the most productive, enterprising, hardworking people the planet has ever seen. They've killed off half of 2 generations. Have they made themselves better off? No. They have now an aging population. China's population may now be peaking and shrinking. China may be entering a long-term demographic economic recession brought on by what? By killing off 400 million of the ultimate resource, the one resource you can't do without, that is human beings.
Thank you so much for speaking boldly on this issue. Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back.
It was in this desperate moment that I said, please, Cardinal Newman, make the bleeding stop.
We hear from a woman whose pregnancy miracle paved the way for Cardinal John Henry Newman's upcoming canonization. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I am your host, Catherine Hadro. For this week's Speak Out segment, a notorious late-term abortionist admits in a TV interview he is okay with killing babies. Take a listen to this recent exchange on the BBC.
I think that it is a baby, and I use it with the patients.
And you don't have a problem with
Absolutely
killing a baby?
I have no problem if it's in the mother's uterus.
That is late-term abortionist Leroy Carhart, recently featured on an episode of the BBC's Panorama. Carhart is one of the few abortionists who will commit an abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. He is accused of injuring or killing multiple women because of his dangerous abortion practices. Carhart faces a long list of complaints, including using unsterile surgical instruments. Carhart's admission that he is okay with killing babies obviously shocked the BBC correspondent. His remarks are vile and evil, but also unexpectedly honest about what abortion is. Abortion advocates often like to dance around what the procedure does and opt to use dehumanizing euphemisms. But Carhart himself says the life in the womb is a human baby, and the abortions he commits kills babies. This is shocking to the conscience, but it's obvious Carhart has grown hardened to the wickedness of late-term abortions. Let us pray that this raw look into the abortion industry stunned viewers into seeing what is truly at stake here: the lives of the innocent, the lives of babies. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com to thank Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and HHS Secretary Alex Azar for their joint letter urging countries to protect the unborn and defend the family at the UN. This October, Cardinal John Henry Newman will be canonized a saint after the 19th century theologian is credited for a modern-day pro-life miracle. Here's the story for this week's Pro-Life Focus. Cardinal John Henry Newman is a 19th century theologian, poet, and to one Chicago mother, a dear friend. Newman will soon be declared a saint, as Pope Francis will canonize him in Rome October 13th, after approving the second miracle attributed to his intercession. The first was a complete healing of a deacon with a disabling spinal condition, and the second, a miracle involving that Chicago mother, Melissa Villalobos.
His face to me was very holy and loving, and I really fell in love with him.
Villalobos first learned of Cardinal Newman by watching an EWTN television program in 2000. It would take a decade later for her to grow a devotion to the Catholic intellectual giant after her husband brought home 2 holy cards with Newman's face on them.
So I took the cards and I put one in our family room and one in our master bedroom. And I would pass his image throughout the day, and I would see his face, and I would talk to him, and sometimes I would pray for something, and sometimes I would just have a conversation with him. And I was really drawn to his face. Here I was having these regular conversations with this brilliant cardinal, and I thought, oh my goodness, how can he tolerate me?
He more than tolerated. During a tragic time for the Villalobos family, he poured out his love. In February 2013, Melissa and her husband conceived their 5th child and learned their unborn baby did not have a heartbeat.
I knew I was going to lose that baby, and I reached out to Cardinal Newman for help. I said, Cardinal Newman, I need your help. I am so sad, and I'm going to lose this child, and I also don't want to lose my faith. I want to make sure that when this child passes on, that I keep my faith in the Catholic Church, and that I still know that Jesus loves me, and I still want to love him. So I said, please, Cardinal Newman, help me preserve my faith. And I lost that child, and right afterward, I asked myself, do I still love Jesus? And the answer was yes.
A few months later, there was another potential tragedy. I know this may be difficult, but I want to speak now about your 6th pregnancy with Gemma. Can you take us to that morning of May 15th, 2013? What was going on that morning?
When I woke up in bed, I was in a pool of blood. I had a rip in my placenta, which had become detached from the uterine wall. And that had occurred several weeks prior. So I had been losing blood for many days. But I woke up and I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do?
Instead of calling 911, Villalobos was more concerned with her 4 young children at home, as her husband was away on a business trip and they had no nearby family to help with childcare.
So I decided to get the kids set up for breakfast, and I went downstairs, which was a really bad idea. I wasn't supposed to be walking at all, really. And I set them up with Cheerios and yogurt, and I told them not to get out of their seats. And they stayed in their seats. And then I went upstairs into my bathroom, and I had closed the bedroom door and the bathroom door because I didn't want them to sneak up on me and see the bleeding. I also didn't want them to get hurt. So I went in the bathroom and I collapsed on the floor, and I was losing a lot of blood.
The Catholic mother realized she needed to call 911, but discovered she didn't have her phone near her. Villalobos worried that if she screamed loudly for her children to help, it would be too much for her body to handle and could be endangering.
It was in this desperate moment that I said, please, Cardinal Newman, make the bleeding stop. And he did, and it stopped instantly. It never returned, and I was healed completely.
To Melissa, it was immediately obvious this was a miracle.
After I asked Cardinal Newman to please make the bleeding stop, he filled the bathroom with this blast of roses, and I inhaled this amazing scent, and I thanked him. And he made a second blast of roses up there, and I knew this was a supernatural scent. And then when I went downstairs to check on the children, he made a third and a final blast of roses because I had thanked him for making sure my children downstairs were safe.
And that unborn baby whose life was endangered was also safe.
Tell us about Gemma. What is she like and how is she today?
She's great. She's 5 and she's just now starting to read. She plays the piano. She loves to ride her bike. She's very curious. She's sweet. She's funny. She loves to dance. She's healthy. She has no medical problems whatsoever.
What do you make of the fact that Cardinal Newman's miracle is connected to an unborn baby? What's the significance there?
Well, I think we can all agree that God is not acting randomly. And so if we're getting so many miracles with babies and pregnancies, he's obviously sending us a message, reminding us of the dignity and the value of human life from its very beginning. The question then is, well, why is God doing this? Well, why does he want us to be aware of the dignity of life? And I think that we need to do everything we can to promote the culture of life. And if we can all just say even one extra Hail Mary a day, one extra rosary, or whatever we can do to pray for our culture.
Villalobos says she loved Newman before he cured her and will carry this miracle with her every day. While this Catholic wife and mother describes her life as ordinary, she's on an extraordinary mission to share her saintly friend with the world.
He's an intellectual genius, a brilliant theologian. He plays the violin. He knows Latin maybe better than anyone who's lived. He can recite whole books of the Bible. But just as noteworthy is the enormity of his loving heart.
Blessed John Henry Newman, pray for us. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at ProLifeWeekly@EWTN.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.